for this audience and we're going to talk about how actually the convergence of those two things. So if you're scratching your heads wondering about peat bogs and prose poems, you're in the right place, because Anne here is going to guide us into them and a number of other things as well. So Anne, we're going to talk about two things kind of bouncing between them. One is this new book of poetry. This is your fifth book, I believe, right? Called The Language of Now. And they are, in fact, prose poems. So if you flip through it, you might think these look like little short stories because they're written in paragraphs. But we're going to talk about what makes them prose poems as opposed to little essays or stories and things like that. We're also going to be seeing a pair of short films that both involve peat bogs. And there's peat bogs, a lot of peat bogs, among other things, in the book here. So maybe just starting with, do you find some mysterious link between peat bogs, say, and prose poems? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, it does actually, Tony. I think my time spent researching and writing in response to bogs here in the UK and in Finland made me realise that they are a slice of time. They're extraordinary landscapes and many, many layered. And I think the same can be said about prose poetry. On the surface, as Tony's just said, this book looks like it's little short stories, but when you dive into it, these are intense pieces of writing that have many layers to them. So that's the link.
Yeah, that's really nice to know. And peat bogs, for people that don't know, they tend to be a bit hidden away at the tops of moors, right? When you look up and think, oh, that's just a flat hill and there's nothing going on up there. But actually, the sphagnum moss and all these other wonderful tiny mosses that build up layers and layers, as you say, over time, they're also incredibly, incredibly important for recovering. And there's a lot of recovery in this book as well. But maybe
they're an extraordinary landscape. I mean, a peat bog actually sequesters more carbon than a rainforest. They are our precious jewels, really, in this country.
And there are
in other parts of the world.
And you're so you live not too far from Leeds, over in the Caldwell Valley near Hebden Bridge area.
Yeah.
And you're involved in some peat bog projects up there, and something also called the
boggarts.
The boggarts, which, by the way, anyone know what a boggart is? I'm assuming people are fairly familiar with boggarts, as well. So we've got a boggart actually lingering around Seacroft as well. But a boggart is...
this is a campaign group trying to save Walshaw Moor from being developed. It's an amazing moor, but it's on private land, and it's earmarked for a huge wind farm. And I'm not against wind farms, but sticking wind farm on a peat bog is ridiculous.
Well, we're gonna dive deeply into the book of poems in the middle of this event. So we're gonna hear about 15 minutes and a collection of 8 or so of them in a bit. But first, we're gonna see one of the films, one of the short films, and this one is called Red Bog. Is that right?
Yes, this one's called Dancing the Red Bog, and it features a Finnish dancer called Inari Hulkkonen. And the writing that I put to the dance is actually a retelling of a very famous creation myth called the Caldwell. And the poem that you'll hear that accompanies the dance is the first part of this amazing epic from Finland. Evidently, it's a bit like rewriting Shakespeare, I've found out, taking on such an important Finnish work. And what you'll hear is this creation myth that stars a goddess called Laamata, and she's also talking about her son, who is Väinämöinen, and one of the key figures in Finnish mythology.
Okay, so I think we'll watch the film. It's about 8-9 minutes, and then we'll come back and set the stage to dive into the poetry, and you'll start to see, I think, the links between the films and the book as time goes on. So, we ready for Dancing the Red Bog? So here it is. We're going to dim the lights, and the film will come on behind us here.
This morning you asked me, son, where does the strength of your song battles come from? How come your poetry could send a young man into the mire, stuck fast? Your power brewed in the years I spent. Where does the strength come from? How come your poetry could send a young man into the mire, stuck fast until he begged for help? Your power brewed in the years I spent in primordial soup. No solid ground, no light. For 700 years I swam with the one-celled creatures, until I heard a mournful calling over the water, reminding me of Mother. A red-throated diver made me into her nest, tucked her head in my lap, and the warmth of her made me weep. So long since I'd felt another's touch. She left me with a clutch of eggs, and I tried my best to cradle them, but the ocean currents swelled, and they tumbled from my grasp, delicate shells shattering on the bottom of the seabed. "700 years I'd spent in that soup, and now I lost all sense of hope. No solid ground, no light. No solid ground, no light." I dreamt of Mother, over and over, till all the fragments came together. Half became the terra firma, half became the sky above me. From the egg whites came the moonlight, from the egg yolks came the sunshine warming my back. From the egg whites came the moon, from the egg yolks came the sun warming my back.
When you were born, I sang to you. Sang all night, rocking you as I'd rocked the birds' eggs. Years later, here on the Mire's edge, you're my fish shoal in a black pool, or my hooper swan, shedding feathers for a long flight. And some days, when you consider the state we're in, you're an upturned beetle looking for a gust of wind to turn you over, or a grass snake, slimmer than a finger, looking for shelter. The world you inhabit is fragile as a snow globe, and we're at a tipping point. May your songs be stronger. May your poetry cure and soothe us. For you are my half-human, half-wild son, at one with the sphagnum, 90% water. You're my half-human, half-wild creature.
Right. So one of the things that we imagine perhaps poetry can do particularly well is give voice to non-human, or extending beyond humans, getting humans to really get outside of themselves, literally. And I think certainly there we hear and see some of that going on. But your engagement with peat bogs, do you think that, how has that shifted your thinking about the sort of boundaries between human, non-human, and that film in particular?
Yeah, particularly our connection with nature and the natural world has been something that's been obsessing me, I think, for the last decade. And you're right, Tony, I think going to visit this place in particular, which is Teo National Park in Finland, made me realise that, you know, we are so interconnected and dependent on this world around us. We're not separate from it. So creating this character that's part myth, part story, as well as, you know, a real dancer was my attempt to begin to explore those connections, I think.
Yeah, and there's a moment where her face only is revealed sort of quite a ways in, when suddenly you get the glimpse of a face, but before that non-humanness is really pervasive and present. So the film was made. We should mention too that there was an interesting association of who you worked with on the film. Do you want to say a bit about who your collaborators were?
Yeah, I worked with a filmmaker called Lewis Landini, who was my partner's son, or is my partner's son, and this wonderful dancer, Inari Hulkkonen, who is from Finland. And her dance practice, again, explores this relationship with place and the natural world. She doesn't move much, does she? If she'd stepped either side of where she was dancing, she would have been up to her waist in the bog. So that was one of the constraints of dancing in a very watery, unstable landscape.
So before we dive into the poetry in the book, The Language of Now, which we'll do in just a moment here, just one other question just to sort of set the tone perhaps a little bit. So we've talked about prose poetry and bogs. There's also a lot of threads of health, healing, mortality, grief, medicine woven throughout the book. One of the prose poems that particularly grabbed me is one towards the middle called Stages of Restoration, because within the peat bog world, there's lots of talk about what it means to restore a peat bog, and it's a very delicate, complicated thing. But you mentioned in there, I'm just going to quote just one little section from that. On the long road to equilibrium, the bog will no longer slump, but find her new, stable shape. Peat-cutting floors will rise again, fresh layers accumulate, the two will knit together. Time is the healer here. The patient has a lifespan longer and older than a forest. And so I guess, just to set the scene for you coming up to read, that idea of healing and restoration between humans and peat bogs, and is there anything that you're interested in digging into around that?
Yeah, a lot of the poems in this book are around the fragility of the human body and the bogs in our world. I think as I get older, this is something that's striking me more and more, that, how to find your sense of equilibrium in your body and remain healthy, and also the state that our natural world is in are two parallel themes, in my opinion, in this book.
Great. We'll come back for some more conversation and question. I think at the end we might leave room for anyone in the space here in the theater who has a question or two, a couple questions as well. But first I want to let Anne make your way up to the center stage and read to us.
Sorry, I think there's going to be some people behind me, but never mind, I'm sure you'll pay. Okay. I'll be selling some copies of this new book at the end of this evening. The first poem I'd like to read is called Nellie Longarms, and this was a creature from Norfolk who was said to draw people, particularly children, into the bog. I was born beneath the marram grass under sand in the lost village of Eccles-on-Sea. My home was swallowed by the Norfolk coast, flint walls and belfry, the church roof built from the keel of a long boat. I remember its curve like a wide smile. On moonless nights, I'd listen to the trace of the monks' vespers on the wind, the call of the church bell over the waves. My mother spoke of flood and neap tide, shipwreck and storm surge. She said the graveyard split its sun-bleached bones along the shoreline as if the dead were returning to the brine, becoming mud skippers with fins and gills, or little Jonas who knew the language of whales. The locals think I'm a witch and say I lure their spirits into the marsh. They blame me for the dunes that are our birthplace, misunderstand difference for magic. I'm only searching for a familiar face, the traces of kith and kin out here in the samphire and loosestrife, out here with the damsels and dragonflies, their bright blue bodies and short, fierce lives. Thank you. Wasp's nest. I wanted to be a goat when I was young, agile and cloven-hooved. My days were spent poking cowpats with a stick, sending clouds of bluebottles into the hot sky as hay meadows chirped with crickets and grasshoppers. One evening, there was an empty wasp's nest in Nana Clark's attic, paper whirls like a handmade balloon. I went and sat with it amongst the trunks of musty linen and love letters, the regrets and hopes of her thrifty wartime generation. I'd always thought of Nana as a good witch, full of herbal remedies and canny wisdom. Neighbours had her down as an utter crackpot. What would she have made of Brexit, long COVID, climate catastrophe? Would these words have been barbs in her throat as she pursed her lips and searched for marshmallow and lemon verbena? Perhaps the wasps are still swarming out there, looking for a place to shelter. I listen for the thrumming of wings, the ragged edges of our lives. Thank you. This next poem is about this peat bog body that was found on Lindo Moss, just south of Manchester many years ago. He used to be on display in Manchester Museum, and I think he's in London at the moment. And I went round the bog with a group of archaeologists who've managed to piece together the last few moments of his life, hence this poem. Lindo Man. My last meal was gruel and a burnt griddle cake that stuck in my throat. I went willingly at first, with 4 of them into the mire. Knew I would end up face down in the peat, dreamt of joining my spirit ancestors in the earth's bowels. I'd offered myself as a sacrifice so that my wife and 3 girls could reap a gentle life. Roman armies were gathering in the valleys, all iron and bronze and muscle power. I was not prepared for the sinew taut about my neck, cutting into flesh, or the crack of my ribs, blow to my skull, and that blade flashing from a man's fist, as if I was a suckling pig in the slaughterhouse. I'm sure I heard a scream just before the mist cloaked me, and the moss was full of nameless, shapeless things. Thank you. This next poem is the title of the collection, The Language of Now. And I was inspired by this wonderful poet, Helen Ivory, who helped me edit this book. And here's a quote from her poem Kite, from her collection The Dog in the Sky. Let this chill be removed from me. Let it be now. Let it be now. Now is so difficult to hold on to, slippery as line-cut mackerel, easier to gorge on yesterday's soda bread or the crescent-shaped biscuits of tomorrow. Now is a copper saucepan coated with olive oil, garlic just about to burn. Now slips away like a driftwood smile or a stroll on the seashore, a pebble-washed Sunday or a spring moon waxing and waning. Now is the well-seasoned risotto or a pause in late-night milky conversation. Now is a train pulling into that country station where no one climbs aboard and no one leaves, and the poem's already full of birdsong, well written. Thank you. It's actually very difficult to stay in the now, isn't it? It's such a slippery thing, I think, to find that immediacy. It'll take me a long time, I think, keeping practicing. Okay, so just 2 more poems. And this one is inspired by my late partner, Dave Bowie, who I know many people in the audience knew very well indeed. And as I was working with his son on the films and being with him through the stages of pancreatic cancer, the idea of the peat bog and healing and his illness intertwined in these poems. And this one's called Watershed. The district nurse will be with my lover now, checking the PICC line, changing his dressing, unhooking him from the chemo pump. If he was here with me, he could bathe his cracked feet in an upland stream, wash away the smell of hospital corridors, sickness that lingers like sour milk. I dip my hair in water and think of my far northern roots, the fjords and tundra where the Sami tread lightly across the peat, herding reindeer. My dreams are fermenting underground, dreams the colour of Baltic amber. I scan the horizon. Somewhere is the source of all this water, beyond the reservoir where a stone circle is submerged. Time to make an offering. Chemo has made my lover queasy. He sleeps all afternoon, and I'm busy stuffing pillow after pillow with thistledown to help him rest. I sew him a nightshirt of nettle leaves, soft as velvet, my fingers taking all the stings until they fizz for hours. I dream of my 6 swan brothers, the way they rose in a great V shape across the wash, migrating to the tundra for summer. Once the evening is as cool as stone, I will carry him on my back up a cart track and pack horse route. Here in the tops, he could listen to the world humming, bees collecting pollen. I will fill his larder full of row upon row of golden jars of honey, as if the sun itself has been bottled for the upcoming winter. Thank you very much.
So we'll chat a bit more before the next film. So first of all, thank you. And those were fantastic to hear, and so many images. But this notion of, threaded throughout all of those, right, is this notion of holding, preserving. The Lindo man, the idea that the peat bogs literally preserve, they do preserve stories, they preserve objects, they preserve organic stuff that ends up inside of them. There's a kind of archiving that goes on. And I wonder the parallel being in these kind of hospital situations that I'm sure many of us have been through when you're in a hospital medical situation, and you know that time moves very strangely to begin with, and there's a sense of wanting to hold on to all kinds of particular details, and wondering what use they'll be when they'll come back later. But that parallel between the peat bog preserving and the way that in the end these prose poems sort of soak up and preserve and bottle, as the last line of that last poem mentions. How does that surprise you?
I think when writing them at the time, there's never that time to reflect on what it is you're creating, but actually putting them all together in the book, and this chronological line of going through an illness and visiting these places meant that, you're right, I think that idea of bottling something, wanting to preserve something, and also, having a book, having the thoughts of this time period from COVID up until last year has made it is an act of memory, isn't it? But also hopefully a celebration of a life, and also these landscapes that I've fallen in love with. Mm.
And where you live in Caldwell Valley and Hepton Bridge, knowing that the peat bogs are sort of up there, out, just sort of beyond the world of human habitation. Does that physical relation, sort of where they are, just a bit out there, literally just off the edge of the horizon, is that something that, how does that linger in your mind?
Well, I live in a very old cottage that's actually within walking distance of the blanket bog in the Caldwell Valley. And so I've been exploring it in different times of weather and year, and just discovering, this amazing miniature world of sphagnum mosses, all the colours, the stone, the lichen. It is quite an incredible landscape, but you have to get in it. You have to get very close to it to see its beauty. From a distance, it does just look like this big blank space. And it's one we've exploited for hundreds of years.
And this next film is called Sphagnum, is that right?
Yeah.
So we'll get a sense of what a sphagnum moss is. But maybe just to give a little context, in the visit I did to the peat bogs, one of the things about sphagnum mosses that really impressed me, I mean, again, they're tiny, and if you look at them with magnifying glass, you get this whole sense of the incredible complexity, but also the fact that they hold something like 20 times their weight in water, that they soak up, and there's a density to it that I think reminds me of how the prose poems, what makes a prose poem different from prose, let's say, is that it soaks up 20 times its weight of water, or some equivalent, or 20 times its weight of meaning compared to normal prose, something like that, perhaps. Yeah.
That's a lovely idea, Tony. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll try and remember that. Great.
So maybe something else that to prepare for the film about. You want to set the scene a little bit for the film, and then we can circle back.
Yeah, I will do. So this second film was shot by Lewis, my partner's son, and he edited this one. Dave is the soundtrack on his double bass, and this was filmed in Finland rather than... actually, some of it was filmed in Yorkshire as well. There's not so much dance in this one. There's some rather strange pictures of me lying face sideways in a bog, which slightly shocked me the first time I saw this on the big screen. You think, oh my word, this is very unflattering, and we'll do it for art, Tony. We'll do it for art.
Well, Dave's double bass in your poetry and Louis' film, so there's these three elements coming together.
Inari is in the film as well.
Inari is in the film as well.
With a wonderful squelch. Listen out for the squelch.
Yes. And maybe just a little more on Dave's contribution and the music. Is there anything you just want to say about kind of how he approached the creation of the music?
Dave couldn't help himself getting into this project because his son and me were working together, and so he was like the other artist. So he was absolutely delighted when Lewis asked him whether he'd write some music to go with this film, and I think he's managed it brilliantly. Yeah.
And did Lewis and Dave have much... Did you sort of bring them into the peat bog world, or had they had some familiarity with peat bogs and sphagnum moss from
No,
other...
I was the introduction into the bog.
Okay, so you were the gatekeeper into the world of sphagnum moss and peat bogs. Okay,
yes.
So that's fantastic to know as well. So let's watch Sphagnum, and then after the film we'll open it up, and if anyone out in the audience has some questions as well, or just has your own peat bog prose poem, convergence, thoughts, we're glad to hear them. So ready for Sphagnum.
Mowing weather and a blue tractor, fields striped with drying grass. Mowing weather and a blue tractor, fields striped with drying grass. The fringe of your Hesto bog was once a firing range. Hand grenades and shrapnel embedded in the Baltic pines. Metal fragments, blunted saws, made the trees impossible to cut down. Rectangles of heather rectangles of heather, burnt or shorn, burnt or shorn, burnt or shorn. I wish you could see Teo's late summer bounty, lingonberry, blueberry, cranberry, the pale yellow flush of chanterelles across the forest floor. I wish I could show you the fiery stems of wild rosemary, the way the stunted birch trees, no bigger than a handspan, have found their way to thrive in the tapestry of sphagnum, holding on. Meadow browns flit, flit, flit. The wind sings. No turbines. The land is eggshell delicate. Far away in a Yorkshire city, your third session of chemo takes place. If I were sphagnum, I would quench the white-hot rage you feel, for I hold 20 times my own weight of water in my cells. I would embroider the moors above your terrace with the softest russets, oranges and greens, a Persian rug on which you could fly when sleep won't fucking visit. For I can calm the heat of the carbon in the earth, soak up all human bluster. So let me flourish, let the bare peat heal, block the gullies and grips.
Well, first off, thank you for the two films, the poems, and I have to say that Louis' images, your words, Dave's music, I mean, it's an ecosystem, it's such a delicately intertwined ecosystem, again, so much like what you see if you actually go to a peat bog where these things are connected, but with such subtlety, especially, I mean, Dave's music and sort of the delicacy of it at moments is just fantastic.
Thank you, Tony.
So in a bit, we're gonna. Oh, Peter's got the mic. We'll open it up for questions, but maybe even more pertinent, also just if there's something that you noticed in the poems and the images, these sorts of things that you can share back as well. It's just a chance to sort of send things back our direction and have it part of, again, this archive of this conversation, this recording, this moment, celebrating the book and the work. But just a final thought on watching that. First of all, you looked quite cozy, nestled in amongst the sphagnum moss, I have to say. And I guess it is correct.
It's absolutely freezing.
20, so it is, and you mentioned the same number that I gave, so that's, I guess I'm on the right track, that 20 times its weight that it contains again as well. Yeah, so again, but one of the other things that I don't think we've touched on about peat bogs that I just think resonates with your poetry and the films is the carbon that you mentioned there and its role in sort of storing carbon, and the fact that peat bogs contain more carbon than tropical rainforests do, but also the layering, and people may be familiar with cutting peat to burn for fuel and things like that. But the amount of time that's represented in just a small layering of peat, and I forget the exact number, but I'm just going to something along 1 meter is
about 10,000 years.
Okay, so. Again, another way to think of, there's the density in how much water that the sphagnum and the other types of plants hold, but also the density of time that's represented in just a small amount of physical space, which I think is, again, just something that's slightly boggles the mind, but it certainly provides lots to ponder and think about.
I really like that pun there, boggles the mind. Well
Yeah,
done.
boggle, there we go. So yeah, so it's the
Impressive.
boggling. Well, we've got, I think, about 10 or 12 minutes, so time for the microphone in the hands of Peter to travel around the room a bit. So if there's a question, just a comment, maybe even just something that you noticed that really struck you, this is your chance to contribute. So.
How do you think your experience of working with the Boggarts on the Book of Bogs affected your work?
Mm.
Yeah, this was another project that came out of looking at Peat, was part of this campaign group, and they've produced a book called The Book of Bogs, which is 40 writers writing about Peat, including the wonderful Patti Smith.
Which we were talking about beforehand, yeah.
And I think reading all those other approaches to this subject really enriched my own writing. Many of the people that were writing were ecologists, novelists, poets, gardeners, people from all different backgrounds. And so that idea of layered experience definitely came to the fore. Thank you.
And while we're on that, just a bit more about the Book of Bogs. So it's a collection of writing, and who was behind, who initiated that project?
It was edited by two wonderful poets, Claire Shaw and Anna Chilvers, who are based in Caldwell. And the book is published with Little Toller Press, who do amazing books on environmental themes. It's actually sold out at the moment, otherwise I would have brought a few today. It's going through a reprint.
Yeah. All right. Making our way over, I think, house left.
Sorry, Richard.
Hi, Anne. I really loved the rewriting of the creation myth, which quite literally brought it to life. It was just beautiful. What inspired you to take that on?
It was meeting Inari, the dancer, and asking her about Finnish literature, really, Sue, and asking her how does this landscape, because Finland is basically a massive bog, how is that reflected in the mythology and writing from Finland? And so she introduced me to the Caldwell, which is this amazing epic that was oral first and then was written down by a key figure in Finnish society. And I found the stories absolutely magical. And that first one of this woman who gives birth to the earth by cradling these eggs that then become part of the world is just the most magical story, I think. So thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed hearing that. The rewriting is, if you look at the original Caldwell, it's written in a very, very strict poetic form. So I just ripped into it, basically, and did my own thing, much to the dancer's horror.
Richard.
Hello. In the second film, was the leaf sort of hanging by a thread symbolic of the sort of vulnerability of the ecosystem? And secondly, what was the significance of the squelch?
Isn't that just a beautiful little bit of film footage of that leaf dancing? One of those amazing things that I suppose happens if you're a filmmaker and not a poet. You look up and can capture something like that. And I think it was just spinning in the forest above the bog, possibly connected to a spider's web, maybe. And you're right, yes, I think it does capture the fragility of that particular landscape beautifully. The squelch, the film Sphagnum was selected and shown at the Hebden Bridge Short Film Festival last year. And so I was with filmmakers, not my usual writers and musicians. And one of them came up to me at the end and said, "Really liked your film. Good squelch." So that's that's my connection with the squelch, I think.
You can't beat a good squelch.
Hello, hi, I'm up here. It's a two-tier question, really. Firstly, I've never heard the word sphagnum before. What does that? What is the sphagnum?
Sphagnum is the moss that grows in peat, and there are 40 to 50 different varieties of it, and it's a very, very ancient plant, and this is the one that breaks down and then becomes peat over the years.
So okay.
Basically, peat is dead sphagnum.
The second part to my question, my good friend here to my right, Martin, who's part of the Aberford performers, 20 years ago, we're from York, so we were on a crazy night out, and he was wearing his little white patent leather shoes, and he ended up for some reason in a peat bog in Napton, in the field
As
in
you do.
Napton. And what my question is knowing that you know the nature of a peat bog, but he's always wonder if his shoes would ever, because you never found them. Did you ever find them?
Did you lose the shoes? Jesus. Brilliant.
It was a detour and a night out.
Yes, I've been on nights out like that.
But it was known as the peat bog, the disappearing shoes in the peat bog. But what the question is will they ever appear?
What a good
technical
question.
here, yeah.
Maybe an archaeologist in the future might dig up a white patent leather shoe and come up with a brilliant story as to why there is just one, and also the significance of patent leather in our times.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Anne. One of the scenes in the film there shows you actually writing, presumably a poem, in the field. So almost like an artist painting in the field. Is that something you do? Does it inspire you to be out in it?
Yes, Tony. It's something I think I've done for about the last 15 years, is to go on a walk and always have a notebook and pen and write outside, in the way that a visual artist might paint on plein air. And otherwise, I just don't think I can capture all the sensory details of a place, the sights, the smells, the sounds, the tastes are much easier to capture if you're just right there directly responding to where you are. Yes, I've always thought that.
Well, one of the things that I think makes Chapel FM sometimes a magical, surprising place, a bit like the previous collaboration where two people came together that didn't know each other but encountered
Phenomenal,
through...
by the way.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So I mentioned a while ago that we made a trip to a peat bog just before Christmas in November, and we brought a group of... we work a lot with asylum seekers many of whom live in a hotel just over the road, and for that trip where we spent a day out, we went with 5 or 6 people from the hotel, particularly from places in East Africa, so Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, for whom the peat bog was very exotic and something they had never encountered before, and then some local teenagers. And we worked with an artist as well, and one of the things that came out of that was that the group invented a language for the peat bog made up of visual symbols, kinds of runes that are then going to be buried in the peat bog along with the shoes. And out of that, then, when we got back into the warm place and had our cups of tea all together, everyone invented sounds to go with those kind of hieroglyphic image that the peat bog would speak. And so there was a bit like what you did just before this, kind of vocal sound art poetry. And the plan is to go back to the peat bog in the spring with that group and their sound art poetry. So if you're all interested in hooking up with us. It might be lovely to sort of see how some of your work and that project come together, because I think that
Thank you.
we'd love to share your work with that group and vice versa, and maybe
Great.
see if something interesting emerges from that. So,
Thanks very much, Tony. I'd love to.
yeah. So if there's time for maybe one or two more comments from in the room, and then I just had one or two to end with myself. Tallulah, over here.
Just as I was watching the second film there, it really struck me that the detail-oriented cinematography married so well with your detail-oriented poetry. So I just wondered if you could speak a bit more about how that process worked, if all four of you brought your own artistry and it happened to work so well together, or if there was a bit more direction from your side.
Thanks, that's a very good question. I think the team of Lewis, Inari and myself, we'd worked together a year previously looking at how poetry and dance and film can speak to each other. So when we came to do this project, there was that communication there between us. And there was a lot of talk about how to seamlessly layer those different ways of working. And quite a lot of direction, quite a lot of time spent in the editing room. The music came last, and I think in some respects that probably was the right way round, because Dave could compose and see the whole finished thing and then put a really delicate soundtrack to it. It wasn't easy. We did fall out with each other in a major way in Helsinki airport. I won't go into details right now, but if you see me afterwards, I'll tell you the story. So there was clash as well as creativity. Yeah, which I'm told happens on all the best projects. Yeah.
Very good. I want to make sure I got your signal right, Peter. You can shout it out to me. Was it just to carry out? Okay, very good, very good. A last shout out if anybody out here, and then I wanted to go. We'll do.
It's more that you made reference to a fairy tale or a folk tale, which I think I used to really love, and I can't remember it, so I partly want you to tell it me again. But it was this lovely moment when you were imagining, a sort of tender moment of imagining weaving a blanket for Dave out of the sphagnum, and something. It was such a sense of something being created and wrapped around out of the nature. And you talked about the 6 brothers flying around. I remember something about the brothers that were turned into swans, were they? And the sister brought them back by knitting or weaving coats for them, was it, or something like that. But I thought it was a lovely allusion. I just couldn't quite remember what had happened.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. It is. It's a fairy tale called The 6 Swan Brothers, and their sister weaves nettle leaves into sleeves so that her brothers can be returned to human form. It's a beautiful fairy tale, and seemed appropriate as that way of being the carer, the person who wishes to be there and to make something in order to heal. Yeah. Well, it's a mosaic of a landscape.
Yeah.
So on the drier bits, yes, the boggiest bits are water and sphagnum that we've talked about. But yes, that there's a whole range of plant life there. And I think, yes, that idea of your fingers fizzing, it's sometimes if you're sitting with someone who's ill, you just wish you could be the person taking the hit, don't you? Yeah. Is was the idea behind that poem, I think.
That image of, taking the hit for another. So I'd like to just wrap up. We're coming to the end of this day of the Writing on Air Festival, and this has been a great way to end the second day of the festival. We're here with Anne talking about, again, the language of now. I'm just going to end with an image from maybe your book, and I'm just briefly, if you can set the scene, which is, I was particularly drawn to one of the poems called The Goldberg Variations that happens to involve radio, so we can sign out today. We're going to be going into a couple of pre-record broadcasts, so for listeners out there in the radio space, tune in. There's a couple more programs still coming over the broadcast, and we'll pick up again tomorrow. But first off, thank you, Anne, for joining us so much, and I'm going to ask you a final question. But first, just we have a round of applause for Anne for sharing the films. And the poems. So, but just to quickly conclude, so this Goldberg Variations poem, just briefly mentioned, it starts with a little citation about how in 1930, apparently, in the BBC, the announcer came on the air and said, there's no more news to say today in the normal news schedule, and so they just put on a record of Bach, I guess, right, or something like that. So, and that leads into this image, which I'm just going to end with, so we can let Anne's words ripple out as we sign off and move into the pre-record. So this describes how Bach filtered through the radio, Glenn Gould played, and sleep returned like a distant cousin. The insomniacs of the world were calm, chests loosened, breathing slowed. The music was longed for rain, soothing the cindered forest of the New South Wales. In another country, desert militia laid down rifles, shared mint tea, marveled at the Milky Way. Brazilian loggers cut power to their chainsaws, ignored the foreman. Mahogany and teak trees sighed messages of peace through the Marsilia filigrees of the rainforest. Across the globes, phones were silent, redundant in silk-lined pockets, mock leather handbags, half forgotten on bedside cabinets. You suggested Scrabble, and I smiled. Yeah.
And Caldwell, Tony Macaluso, and the books are for sale downstairs.